Hey everyone, this is Luke Johnson, and I'm with my friends tonight, Jordan Cline and CJ Eller. And this week, Jordan picked out an essay called Religion and the Intellectuals by one of my favorite thinkers that I discovered in my PhD program, Hannah Arendt. So before we get into it, I want to know why Jordan selected this essay and kind of some thoughts about this essay from CJ and Jordan just off the top of their heads.
Cool. Okay. Well, I picked it because I kind of thought, well, who were some really big public intellectuals who were females in the 20th century? And you guys have been talking a lot about Hannah Arendt. And I just said, heck with it. Let's just go for it. So, yeah, that's my simple answer to that.
Okay.
And why this one in particular about religion and intellectuals?
I think it's because it seems like to me there's like sort of that relationship that if you're an intellectual, you can't be religious. And if you're religious, you can't be an intellectual. So I wanted to see what her thoughts were on the two.
Very cool. So, What did you think what were your impressions of reading this text?
Sure. Maybe we should start with you. I don't know what your impressions were.
Oh, me? I mean, look, I think it's a very small sampling of what I think is her more robust work. I mean, I don't think it really compares to her works on the origins of totalitarianism, on revolution, life of the mind. I mean, those are things that I think you really just dive in and inhabit. I think we only get the smallest sampling of her intellect here, but we get enough. I mean, it's a short article. I think it's only like 5 pages long. We get enough to see her unique form of philosophical analysis. She is not a forceful thinker. She is delicate and sort of hovers above the text and offers insights that others don't, who may be more dogmatically driven. I think that is her special skill set. And she wouldn't even consider herself a philosopher. I think a lot of the times she considered herself either a journalist or a political theorist. But to be honest, I think she has more profound philosophical insights than people who give themselves the title philosopher. So what about you?
So for me personally, I think it goes without saying that I really relate to a mind who can maneuver around questions, or you can really see how someone's minds work, how they approach or tackle questions. And this article or this essay is in this question format, and we see Hannah Arendt tackling these questions, even questioning the definitions that are within the questions themselves and what they mean. And I think it shows somebody really working that out.
Yeah.
And I thought rather brilliantly too, by the way.
Yeah.
So, and like you said, Luke, it's almost like questions are a mirror to somebody's approach to thinking. And then this, I think, is a wonderful mirror into Arendt's thoughts.
We get to know her mind. We get a little bit of a portal into her psychology. I mean, do you feel like you got a sense for who this woman was through this work?
I feel like it just barely scratches the surface. And I thought it was interesting that the responses were originally from an interview for a publication.
Oh, I didn't know it was from an interview.
Yeah, or I think it was a question, right? I mean, because it was for a publication in a magazine from like the 1950s.
Right.
So I was kind of surprised by the format, and I was kind of left wanting more.
Yeah.
Well, but other than that, I thought it was a really great way just to kind of have an introduction to Hannah.
Well, hopefully you've been seduced, and we will seduce others into studying Hannah Arendt. So, can we get into it?
Yeah.
Let's
all right. Let's instead of this prologue here.
So what's the structure?
All right. So I've prepared an essay. Okay. I will, when there is a question that allows for thoughtful discussion, I will pause, or maybe wait till the end so we can break this all down. Okay. So. Like I said, this essay is called Religion and the Intellectuals. All right, so here's some background information. In 1950, the Partisan Review asked a number of prominent thinkers, and Arendt being one of them, along with W.H. Auden, John Dewey, Robert Graves, Marianne Moore, A.J. Ayer, and a bunch of other people, to respond to the religious revival amongst intellectuals and those with secular attitudes. Now, Arendt's response can be broken down into 5 general topics. The first, the causes of the trend. The second, the change in convictions among intellectuals. 3, religion and culture. 4, religion and literature. And 5, the separation of religious consciousness from religious beliefs. And she uses the example of Heidegger and Malraux here, who I don't know a lot about. It's not really important for the essay. Now, Arendt's reply occurred in issue 17, volume 2, February 1950 of the Partisan Review. All right, so here is the first section, my summation and some sparkled analysis, and let's see what happens, okay? Both naturalism and theological conversations presuppose the principle of causality, though naturalists only consider natural causes. The medieval proof of God relied on God as a prime mover. This would be a supernatural cause. Honest atheists' positions deny a chain of causality involving a supernatural cause and affirm the coincidental character of all events. Without the possibility of a prime mover in the chain of causality, then one cannot reason from the existence of creatures to a creator. The implication intimated by intellectuals here is that religion is an illusory remedy. Okay, let me keep going here a little bit. I'll pause after the first section. How about that? Arendt pivots and demonstrates that the natural cause assumption pretends to be true or false. So what does she mean here? The principle of causality, if I understand her correctly, cannot be true or false unless there is an objective reality to compare it against. By saying that the principle of causality pretends to be true or false, signals that anyone who holds it, theologically or naturalistically, is claiming to have information that they simply do not have. So despite what naturalists may say, and this is my interpretation of her article, if you assume the principle of causality at all, you will always prove God. However, as Kant demonstrated, facts cannot be logically deduced. What does this mean? It's been a little while since I've examined Kant's critique of pure reason, but I think what she is getting at here is that the concept of God may be logically derivable from the assumption of causality. However, that assumption itself is not epistemologically justified, and the logical concept of God is not the same as God's facticity. All sorts of logical concepts may follow from assumptions. However, that does not entail the reality of the derived concept. I might be putting words into Arendt's mouth here, but she is rather brief about the matter. So science cannot prove or disprove the facticity of God, despite how badly some of its most forceful advocates want to deny God's existence. A scientific attitude that believes otherwise suffers from what Arendt calls an uncritical superstition. And I'll just say 5 more lines and then we're going to break, okay? There's philosophical significance to this inability to make valid statements on the existence of God. On the most interesting factual information, men have been left in the dark. Theology may say that such darkness allows for faith and merited salvation, whilst philosophy could conclude that the lack of information allows for human freedom. According to the scientific attitude, the most fundamental questions concerning the human condition and being are beyond factual knowledge and experimentation. Okay, so let me pause there.
That's a lot.
And let Jordan and CJ interject some of the thoughts they had as I read that. Did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? What are some of the ideas that naturally sort of emanate if I have gotten it right or wrong about what she's saying here in this first section?
Do you want to go first?
Is there anything philosophically interesting you think about what I've said here? Do you want clarification? Do you want me to defend something?
I mean, I think it's fitting that she attacks the question by saying, what's a cause to begin with, right? Or she goes into the idea of causes and what they mean, even from a scientific and then from a theological or religious perspective. And I think that's an interesting approach, because she could have just gone and said, okay, I'm going to give you why people might be thinking about religious revival at this point of time in history, because war or this or that. But she just says, okay, hold on, let's establish definitions here. Let's talk about causality. So I think that's coming at this question from a different angle, just as I was mentioning previously.
Well, what's interesting about the angle she comes at it here? All right, some of the things that jumped out that were interesting to me, right, was the fact that she says, if you assume the principle of causality, you are going to prove God, whether you are a naturalist or a supernaturalist, right? So there has to be some sort of critical skepticism that we have here about this assumption of causality, right? Right? So that that it's either true or false, but really it's just a pivotal axiom that we all sort of take on. So I think that's kind of interesting that she would concede that regardless of the perspective that you take, you're going to somehow end up at a prime mover.
Which means, which is interesting because that almost means that causality is so ingrained in us that we don't even realize
we don't question
that
it.
We use it.
Right. That it's something that could be up for debate as a way to understanding our world.
So this is even from a scientific point of view as well, that we're trying to say this is a theological, talking about God, or even
what she seems
scientific.
to be saying here is that you're going to get back to God one way or the other. But she says that shouldn't be something that theologians take solace in, because the type of God it's going to get you to is a logical concept of God, right? So theologians and religious people shouldn't celebrate too early if the principle of causality has been assumed, because ultimately it's going to be a vacuous concept. Who cares about a God that you can prove from causality, right? This goes back to Pascal. Pascal said, if I can remember it, the formulation of it perfectly, but he said, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not the God of the philosophers. And he had that sewn into his jacket, right? So what if you can get to this deistic God? You want a God that is intimately involved in your life. This is not the God you want, okay?
Mm-hmm. So what is it about that God? Is it more so the concept of that God, or is it something wrong with just us formulating it in our heads? I guess she's going to say that, she says, as Kant said, but maybe I don't know if we truly understand what that means.
Well, I think Kant has problems with proofs for the existence of God in a multiplicity of ways, and you have to look at it, and we have to jump back into the critique of pure reason. I mean, I spoke to you guys earlier off camera about some of his concerns about the ontological argument. I haven't reviewed his arguments against this would probably be more in keeping with the cosmological proof for the existence of God. If I remember correctly, I think he thinks it's a house of cards, and if the ontological argument doesn't work, then the cosmological argument won't work. They're all sort of nested and built on top of one another. But I don't know about that. I always found as a child the cosmological argument, or this chain of causality, to be, I always thought this was a pretty good argument for a prime mover, to be honest, ever since I was 4 years old, because I was always like, well, then who made this, and then who made this? I was never comfortable with, the universe is eternal, or like it's turtles all the way down, or whatever the expression was, right?
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
More questions, or I can go on?
Sure.
You guys seem to have a question about this concept of God and why it's problematic.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea would be here is if you were to assume some other principle and derive some other concept, if your assumption is problematic to begin with, then you're going to end up with a problematic concept as well.
So it almost seems that there's a problem in our mind, that since we try to formulate God in our minds, whether it be the chain of causality or, like you said, the endless turtles, that's where the problem is, because God exists outside of our conceptions of him, or
well, that's an interesting conversation. At least what could be rationally intuited. So yeah,
Okay.
that would. So I don't know, but that's a whole other can of worms.
Sure, but the conclusion she makes at the end of that is that we are left with this being placed in the darkness, right? That we are in the dark when it comes to certain information.
Right, and to be honest, you've got to be some sort of agnostic about these issues. What I think is really great here is she says that scientists that claim to be able to defeat a belief in God suffer from an uncritical disposition or uncritical superstition themselves. So we see this within modernity a great deal. Like we see people like, I don't know, Richard Dawkins or someone like that, right? Who talks about there being a God delusion, and people who are sort of proudly atheistic or something like that. And Hannah Arendt is sort of grabbing them by their collar and being like, oh, don't be so smug. You've got your own superstition that you're hanging on to too. This law of causality that you've idealized, well, look, it's going to lead you back there. So I think that's what she's trying to say.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I think she thinks that such scientists haven't thought about it critically enough. All right. So we ready to go on to the second section?
Yeah. So what's the second question again?
The second question was the change in convictions among intellectuals was the topic.
Okay.
All right, so here we go. Arendt says we should not overestimate the significance of religious revival. It is just a zigzagging puff of the zeitgeist that's been going on since the Enlightenment. Every 20 years or so, a type of naturalistic attitude is followed by religious revival, which is no big deal in her eyes. Perhaps we should pause and ask this question. Why does that happen? Counterintuitively to Arendt's lights, it would be shocking if there were not interruptions during the 300-year decline of Western religion. What is her explanation for this? She invents an idea, which may or may not have some grounding in philosophy, psychology, and natural science. Arendt calls these interruptions intellectual memories. Okay, so what is an intellectual memory? We may not have a concise answer from this work alone, but she informs us that they are distilled within us over the course of millennia. What precisely is being stored within us and passed on from generation to generation? She seems to be saying that certain Christian ideas and dogma can be implanted within the human psyche. Perhaps Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals would be helpful to read in conjunction with this essay of Arendt's. Arendt points out that even though fewer people believe in the last judgment at the end of time, she claims the overwhelming majority do not, this does not mean that the majority has become more scientific. Sidebar, Arendt might not have a robust understanding of what the last judgment at the end of time means. Biblical eschatology is a little more complicated than this, but it can be forgiven considering the brevity of the piece and the audience to which he is writing. Arendt doubts that the rise of science has caused disbelief in a final judgment. Now that people don't believe the incarnation or the Trinity, the masses are ready to believe anything. Presumably she means astrology, tarot cards, the occult, or anything else that is not by any means scientific. She gives a beautiful and burning quote at the end of this section. And Jordan, why don't you read it since you're a girl and she's a girl? Do you want to read it?
Sure. Which
All right, now make sure you're talking to the mic.
All right.
Right there.
All right. This one here? Yeah, sure. This is plain superstitiousness, and the only connection I can see between this frightful gullibility of modern people and the scientific attitude is that the contents of highbrow and lowbrow superstition can change even more rapidly than the contents of scientific discoveries.
That was beautifully recited. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're really good at that.
I read that passage a lot.
Yeah, did you like that?
Because I really liked it.
You like that passage?
Yeah,
That's a good passage, huh? Arendt is right to point out that simply because science is on the rise, we cannot infer that the masses are becoming more scientific. You can make the case that they are becoming increasingly superstitious. Yet one cannot deny the rise of science and the demise of strict Christian belief. Would it not be better for her to claim that the ever-climbing apogee of science is making people less Christian, but perhaps no less and even more superstitious? There does seem to be some causative connection between the reallocation of faith in Christ, the second Adam, to the atomic atom. This is probably a point to revisit in our discussion. So, let's talk about this. I've given my opinions. Why don't you give me your opinions on this section and your opinions of my opinion?
All right. I thought that was that really resonated with me because she's saying that because people may or may not be more, since people are less religiously inclined, that's not making them any more skeptical. And I don't think people are asking for empirical evidence as much. And I think one of the reasons why this really resonated with me, especially, was thinking about how we consume information now in the information age, where we
go on about that. Please go on about that.
Right. So I mean, think about fake news, right? So if something pops up on my Facebook feed, I might think, and if it's fake news, I'm gonna be like, oh my gosh, an anaconda ate 3.5 caribou. That totally happened. And then I'll go and tell everyone I know about this anaconda that ate 3.5.
That didn't happen.
Which didn't happen.
Okay.
But that's the thing, is that I think that with the sort of deluge of information, we've kind of become a little less critical of what we look at. And I'm saying collectively. As
Now,
a society.
what's interesting is we only really apply this skeptical lens to things that are obviously fake. The anaconda eating 3 caribou.
Oh, do you guys remember? Do you guys remember Bat Boy from the National Enquirer years ago? Like Bat Boy,
right?
Yeah.
But what I mean to. Are there authorities within our society that we never question? Are there any sacred cows that we never investigate for ourselves? And I'm not going to get into it here, but there are a lot of them. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of them. And it's almost like when we dethrone the patriarchs and the religious authorities of the Bible, we put other ones in their place. And we're very okay with putting that exacting scientific skepticism on Christianity, but we're not okay when we turn it over to other things. Well, I'm not going to get into it. You guys all know what I'm talking about, but
yeah, I mean, I might stick my neck out on this one, but I would say, one of those things might be our elections.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So there was a lot of talk from both parties about the rigged elections. Mm-hmm. And fairness, when it comes to our elections, is something that we hold borderline sacred.
Right.
So that's something that we wouldn't really...
We
get really uncomfortable and really uneasy talking about.
We'd never want to question the fact that it might be just a show.
Right, but then when it comes to a discussion on religion or faith...
Yeah.
Nope. It's all hocus pocus.
Yeah.
It is all superstition.
Right.
Don't want to talk about it.
But our democratic institutions are infallible.
Exactly.
Yes.
Impervious.
Yes, it was a great example. What about you, CJ? What did you find interesting about this section? How about this intellectual memories thing?
That's crazy.
Are we just going to let that go? Because
no.
So she's essentially saying, right, that like you get it sort of beat into you, right? This is sort of the Nietzschean idea that you have it's sort of bred into you that you have this Christian paradigm that you're automatically, even if you don't believe in Christianity, that you're going to automatically interpret the entire world through, and that like this is going to just get passed on. Now, I don't know if she means that it's going to get passed on genetically, culturally. She doesn't really have the time to talk about it here. But what do you guys think about this idea of intellectual memories and how they're transferred? I'm sort of exploring Henri Bergson's work lately, and he kind of has this idea that ideas can be passed on through matter. But I mean, I thought this was very intriguing. I thought it needed a lot more investigation. Nietzsche talks about it a bunch in Genealogy of Morals, about how we get this inversion of values. I thought that was super crazy and super interesting. I don't know. What say you?
I mean, what say me? Goodness. I think I just have to ask, because to get to that, she goes against the question again, and she says, I'm not really concerning myself here with the history of intellectuals or intellectuals changing. She's more concerned with what she defines as the history of Western mankind. That is important, right? And then she goes on to say, well, a lot of people, mankind, doesn't seem to believe in the Last Judgment these days. And I suppose I'm just wondering what she means by Western mankind, because I think, as we were discussing off camera, she sort of makes this big assumption that people don't believe in the Last Judgment, as if she took a poll.
Well, I don't think they do. Because I go to a lot of churches. Mm-hmm. If anybody's been listening and watching a lot of the stuff that I've been doing over the past couple months, I've become pretty intense in my Christian belief, and so I've been jumping around to a bunch of churches, and it's a bunch of happy, smiley positivity, and no one wants to talk about serious dogma. No one wants to talk. And now maybe someone will want to invite me and take me to a place where they talk about serious doctrine and dogma. No one wants to talk about the Trinity. No one wants to really talk about the intellectuals and existential significance of the incarnation. And nobody certainly wants to talk about the last judgment of end of days, because that's scary and we just can't handle it because we're a bunch of children. It's like forever children's time during the church service. Mm-hmm. So it's a real big issue. I don't disagree with him Hannah Arendt here.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are afraid to confront the biblical truth.
Well, I think that even goes back to what Jordan was saying. If we take that profound moment at the end where Hannah Arendt says, just because people aren't being more religious doesn't mean they're automatically becoming scientific.
Right.
It also doesn't mean that they're being anti-religious either, right? They can still hold on to semblances of religion. They can still go to church and, like you said, still be part of the congregation, but they can, in some way, be less religious, if that makes... Or I guess, like you said, not really take into account the dogma and the beliefs that
They're just cultural Christians. Yeah. They're Philistines. They're going through the motions. It's what Kierkegaard called, and that's why Kierkegaard was the gadfly of Copenhagen, is that he was trying to wake people up. Socrates was trying to wake people up, right? And maybe that's what you two are doing here tonight as well, all right? Is to get people out of their stupor.
Yes.
All right.
So
what about this? What about this idea that I put forward here about there being this causative relationship about the ascension of science and the diminishment of Christian belief? That does seem to be causative. I'm not saying that science is making people more scientific, but I am making the claim here that it's more than just a correlation, right? So when you say that man arose out of a monkey, right? And if you say that we are a grain of sand amongst billions and billions and billions of stars, right? And that the earth is... How old is the earth? How old is the earth? How many billions of years old is the earth? Right? When you start giving these long tracts of time and infinite parts of space and new dimensions and now we're going sideways. Now it wasn't enough to have an infinitely expanding universe. Now we got a multiverse that expands in every direction. So you matter even less. You matter even less, right? So I can't help but think that these scientific ideas, and let's call them, let's just put some air quotes on those things, because like how much of this is dogma? I think it's an important philosophy of science conversation to have about what is the projection that people are having upon the material. And, maybe we need to look at Kuhn's History of Scientific Revolutions at some point to get a better understanding of where empiricism ends and where people's projections begin. But, I mean, if I tell you the story that we came out of a soup and we came out of monkeys and we were this grain of sand in an infinite universe and there's like CJs, Lukes, and Jordans and infinite number of configurations and parallel universes and all this other stuff and time travel and your life doesn't matter, blah, 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 right? How could you not start to abandon the Bible, right? Wouldn't that all work against it?
But then it becomes, like you said,
who becomes more religious because of these things?
Or it just becomes more superstition, or it just takes on the form of another belief, right?
Yeah,
where you have to have faith in this, too. Or you have to have faith that we go around the sun. You have to have faith that we actually did come from chimpanzees or whatever. It almost seems like you also have to believe that atoms exist, right?
And by the way, no one has actually seen an atom. You cannot see an atom. You can only infer their existence from their effects, right? So leading back to our conversation about the principle of causality.
Right.
But atoms cannot be seen with any microscope.
And I wonder, I don't know, do you guys think this goes back to Hannah Arendt's initial idea in question 1, where she said a lot of what is inferred is through our perception, and since that is already muddled as it is, we're not actually observing atoms or objects, but we're maybe just projecting onto these things what we want them to?
Well, there's a limit of factual knowledge. So once we reach that point of like what we can observe, then there is kind of like that extra step of belief that we have to say, okay, like there are atoms that are making up this like solid table, right?
Yeah, where I guess if we go to, like, how do we define superstition?
Well, I that's a big question. Right. So I and probably beyond the confines a little bit of this, I think what she's trying to say in the uncritical superstition is by thinking that the scientist somehow escapes the exact same charge that they have against that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I can detail it exactly. I don't know if I can properly divide what is like good science from superstition.
Right.
But I think what she's trying to say is if it's not reflected upon and you don't get to some sort of honest, sort of agnostic point of view about these issues, then it's going to be infected with a similar sort of
a bias in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next section.
Sure. So I really liked how you brought up the cultural Christian part, because now we're gonna head straight into religion and culture. Right?
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So section 3 and 4. Arendt finds it funny / absurd to organize a church institution for cultural reasons. What does she mean by cultural reasons? Essentially, we need to keep going to church so that poets have material to write about. They need a muse. Further, the church cannot also be a weapon against totalitarianism or safeguard for civilization. Such attempts would be futile against muscular totalitarian regimes. Churches aren't good at standing up to totalitarians. You might have a Bonhoeffer here and there, but the church is pretty easy to dominate. Either God exists and is more important than culture and literature, or he does not exist, and people do not believe despite cultural reasons for doing so. The question one might want to raise here is this: is Arendt being too short-sighted? Of course, a totalitarian regime with weapons can easily subdue a pacifistic church. However, there is some historical record for a church ultimately getting the best of an imposing master. Rome used to oppress Christians, and now it is the seat of the Catholic Church. When one expands the scale, one can make the case that Christianity can be an effective safeguard against totalitarianism. Further, if there were not a lot of young Christian men willing to sacrifice their lives to defeat what they most assuredly thought was the Antichrist, i.e. Hitler, then the outcome of the Second World War would be much different. Of course, this is to greatly expand what Arendt likely had in mind when she was thinking of the church. The body of Christ can be a very extensive thing and can work itself into all organizations to overcome totalitarianism. Further, with the proper understanding of the Holy Spirit, one can ask themselves, what would happen if the Holy Spirit in the church were really removed from this realm? What would happen if it were to be raptured out? Would liberal democracy proceed unabated? Or would some form of totalitarianism take control rapidly? I merely posed the question for a thought experiment and have no definitive answer on the matter. So, what do you guys think about this idea that you can't go to church for cultural reasons and that church is an effective safeguard for civilization and totalitarianism? Sure, I look, she was not expecting me to dig into her like that. I know I put a bunch of crazy ideas out there. I think her point is a fair one on a short scale, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can't go to church just for the sake of getting some sort of poetic inspiration. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that real contact with the divine, you're not going to get it. Like, it's going to be fake. It's going to fall on deaf ears. And truthfully, the church is not a militant organization, so if some sort of imposing totalitarianism comes along, in the very short run, it's going to get overrun. But what about this idea of flipping the tables in Rome? What about this? What about this? And if you expand the scale of time, it actually is a remarkable protective fortress from totalitarianism. What about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, the first example that came to mind as you were talking about that was the Polish Solidarity movement in the 1980s. Mm. And the Catholic Church was a huge emotional and sort of psychic and intellectual sort of safe haven. And like the Catholic Church and the intelligentsia went underground. Right. But they were both these really big factors in this Polish Solidarity labor movement.
Yeah.
And the workers were able to like push back against the state. So, and again, we have to keep in mind too the context, because this was what, 1951.
Yeah, 1950.
Yeah, so this was post World War. So obviously, like, the USSR was still. I'm sorry, Second World War.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, this was when the USSR was just kind of this force to be reckoned with.
Right.
So I think that the Polish Solidarity movement, in my mind, was the first example of the church actually being able to push back.
What do you guys think about this idea that? What do you guys think would happen if there was no church, if there was no body of Christ? Let's just say they rounded up all the Christians and executed them. Okay, or all the Christians caught a cold and died. They got that Christian cold. Okay? What do you have any, what do you think it would look like? I've never thought about it. Do you want to think of, is it something we should think about? How essential is Christianity to prevent totalitarianism from taking over?
I suspend judgment. I have no idea.
I mean, we're here to think about it.
Would there still be that cultural memory, though? I mean, it couldn't... Well,
that's an interesting question.
So,
would that cultural memory still be within the non-believers?
I think that there would still be echoes of it. You know, whether or not people believed in those sort of memories or wanted to practice them or carry them on, there'd still be traces of it.
Would those traces be strong enough to resist a stronger force from without or from within?
I guess it kind of depends on, because I was thinking about it, if like, I don't know, all the Christians were like wiped out like through execution, like for your example, would there be enough moral outrage in order to sort of,
I think there would be,
rectify the situation, or would there be some sort of like retribution?
I would hope there would be.
Right, but then so wouldn't that kind of like moral outrage be tied to some sort of ethical underpinning?
It really depends on the nature of how they're taken out.
Yeah.
Right. So, all right, it's a interesting thought experiment. You can play it at home. You can have the home version of this game. Anything else you want to say before I move on to the final section?
I mean, I think the big thing is that what you said in the beginning about culture and religion is that Arendt nails home that problems arise when we take the question of truth out of religion, right? When we treat God, as she says, as this clever pragmatist who knew what it was good for and what it is good against. So being pragmatic about it, as saying, okay, what can religion be good for? Oh yes, of course, it's going to rise our culture up, and it's going to give us certain beautiful fairy tales and stuff and mythologies that artists can take inspiration from, and we can take a glimmer of hope from. Great. But what Arendt is saying is that if God exists or doesn't, that truth in and of itself is bigger than culture.
Right.
And culture can't do anything about it, whether God exists or whether he doesn't. It's
interesting. It's like all culture is an interesting side effect of believing in God. It's essentially what I think she's saying. Like it's kind of interesting in the sense what she's trying to say is that it's like if you really do have the authentic belief in God, you get all this wonderful culture.
Right.
But it's really just a symptom of getting that.
Almost, not a byproduct, but...
And you can't really reclaim it without it. Yeah, it's kind of a byproduct. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. Byproduct.
Yeah, but I think that's a really strong point that a lot of us like to sidestep, or a lot of us like to just avoid, because I think that undermines the culture that we have in some respect, if it is just a matter of, okay, if God exists.
If you don't have it, you just keep getting Fast and Furious movies.
Right.
What are we on? Fast and Furious 16?
7.
7? No, okay.
God is 7. But I mean, look, I don't really know, but I thought that, because I think we always try to look at Christianity or any kind of religion, if we look at it, as he says, in this agnostic way, or if we I guess like the final question says, if we separate religious consciousness from religious belief and just say, oh, look, they're pious, or oh, look, they are suffering for something greater, oh, isn't that nice? And it's in their art. But that doesn't, if we take it away from the truth that is believing in God, that there is a God who's going to be there, then it's nothing. Right? The question's bigger than that. Yeah. Bigger than culture.
It's much bigger than culture.
Yeah.
You got to have a bigger reason. Like, I don't know, eternity, which is pretty cool. Okay. All right. Let's get the final one here.
Yeah.
Jordan, I'm going to have you do a Hannah Arendt impersonation again, because there's a quote that I believe is good here at the end that I thought we should share with everybody. Arendt wonders what non-Catholic philosophers since Spinoza and Descartes actually accepted traditional belief. The implication is that she can't think of any. That does not mean none existed. Perhaps such thinkers are systematically oppressed by an academic system that elevates secular thinkers over evangelical ones. Her ignorance of such philosophers does not mean such paragons are not toiling away somewhere. For what it is worth, there are a number of contemporary philosophers as of 2017 that profess love of Jesus Christ. It's also surprising that Arendt didn't mention Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard is a non-Catholic Christian writing only a century before her. Many claim, not me since I do not understand the Heideggerian project, that Heidegger himself derived some of his concepts from Kierkegaard. Perhaps that is why his name is not on her lips in this essay. Although, to be fair, I believe in another essay she explicitly writes about Soren, so maybe she saved a whole essay for him for this reason. Maybe she realized the omission after the fact. Maybe we'll have to cover that one another day. I'm not being totally fair to Arendt because I don't understand this collation of essays. We've only looked at this one, so don't sue me from the grave, Hannah Arendt. I do love you. I love you very much, Hannah. Arendt moves on to claim that there have been many modern attempts to make aspects of religious consciousness valid. She asks, what's the point? One cannot preach Christian humility without Christ. On the other hand, she considers that Christianity ruled for so long that all human attitudes are thought of in Christian terminology. 1,000 years of philosophical thought is based upon the Christian credo, even though few philosophers believe that credo. So what are we to do? Throw it out? And here's what she has to say. Jordan, as Hannah Arendt, is going to read another wonderful quote for us.
There we go. All right. I must admit I shall be in fullest sympathy with a zeitgeist that would bring the intellectuals to the point of no longer considering the tremendous body of past philosophy as errors of the past.
Okay. So
that's the final sentence.
That's the final sentence of this essay. And I said, this is a cryptic way to end the essay. So let us discuss what this quote really means. Does she want us to continue to work in Christian categories given the intellectual memories? Does she want us to experience Christian revival? How are we to understand this fragment? I'm going to read it one more time because I don't even know if I understand it. Because, like, in a way, she's, like, saying something, but she's, like, what is she trying to do? She's just, like, she's being coy, right? She's kind of winking at us here. I must admit I shall be in fullest sympathy with a zeitgeist that would bring the intellectuals to the point of no longer considering the tremendous body of past philosophy as the errors of the past. Okay, so she said the past philosophy was steeped in Christian terminology, right? And she's identifying, she's in fullest sympathy, all right? Sympathize means you experience it as well. You're not just empathizing. Sympathizing with this zeitgeist, this religious revival that's going on amongst intellectuals at that time. And so I guess at the very least, she is saying, I don't want to stop thinking in these Christian categories. Now, at the very least, that seems to be what she's saying. She's like, I want to keep my Christian intellectual memories, and I want to keep doing philosophy with these things that have been imprinted upon me, whether they be in my blood or in my brain. I don't know how they got there, but I'd like to keep going. I like Descartes. I like Spinoza. I like these people. I want to keep continuing that tradition. But does she go further? Does she go further? Does she go further and say, I want to be part of the revival? I am in the revival. I am Christian. I don't know if she says that. I know Hannah Arendt is a Jew. Is she a Messianic Jew? Does she understand Judaism to be only, in her understanding of religion? I can't imagine she doesn't understand the difference. I mean, does she think that there's very little daylight between what it means to be a Jew and what it means to be a Christian? I don't know what Hannah Arendt's religious beliefs really were. I can only speculate here. But it seems to me, at the very least, she wants to keep working within a Christian zeitgeist with these intellectual memories. I don't know if she wants to go further and say that she believes it. Although if you hear what she says before, she says either you can't just participate in the culture for the sake of participating in the culture. Earlier she said you have to actually believe it, right? The cultural reasons are not enough to keep going with it. So in a way, and I'm not saying I'm right here, in a way, it seems to me that she's saying that she wants to believe that, but as I confessed earlier in this broadcast, I'm going through something of my own. And so I can be projecting Luke's thoughts onto Hannah's thoughts. So I'll leave it to everybody to do your own homework, read the essay, come to your own conclusion. Let's hear what Jordan and CJ have to say about this.
Can we read the? I think we're going to disagree here, but can we read the past? I'm going to read the sentences before that, because that might paint even a different picture.
It might. I'm not saying I summarize and analyze this correctly.
Sure. So on the other hand, it is obvious that as long as Christian faith ruled unchallenged the consciousness of man, all human attitudes were interpreted in religious and specifically Christian terms. Okay? So I think that makes sense. So like you're saying, like it was ruled in that way, where the Christian thought process was a part of our system, I guess, or if we ourselves had to believe in the specific credo, which was the unquestioned basis of Christian philosophy, so she's talking about that thing, in order to understand it, the Christian philosophy, then we should be forced to throw out more than 1,000 years of philosophical thought. Now, is she talking about Christian thought, or is she talking about secular thought, or like we're even doing like Aristotle or those people that believed in Jesus Christ?
1,000 years.
Right.
So
or maybe
if you're talking about anything before Jesus Christ, you're talking about pre-Socratic Greek stuff.
Yeah.
So she's saying anything that occurred in the 2 millennia, or at least 1 millennia since Jesus Christ.
Okay. All right.
So
that makes sense.
So say the line again about the credo.
So if we ourselves had to believe in the specific credo,
so that's going to be like the incarnation, the Trinity, the Last Judgment.
Right.
Okay.
Which was the unquestioned basis of Christian philosophy. In order to understand all of that, we should be forced to throw out more than 1,000 years of philosophical thought.
But she doesn't want to do that.
So does that mean that she doesn't want to throw away like secular stuff either?
Well, she's saying that the secular stuff can't help but be affected by it. It doesn't even matter.
Right, we might have to throw it. Do you think she's saying?
She's saying all of it.
Right.
All of it. Because it's got the intellectual impression on it.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't want to throw it out.
Right.
She wants to keep it.
Keep what?
The errors of the past.
Right. Which are the
everything secular and Christian, even though it doesn't acknowledge Christian.
Ah, okay.
It doesn't matter what it's called. It's got the intellectual imprinting on it as a result of coming out of the Christian culture.
Okay.
So I think what she's saying is, if I have to choose, I want to keep it.
Mm.
And that might mean actually working within it. Now, what it means to work within those things, I don't know what that means.
Right.
Do they just serve as helpful devices to understand the world and the cash value, or these beautiful philosophical systems? Or to work within it, does that mean that you actually internalize it and believe it.
Because as you said, she's put herself in a bind here because, again, as she says in this part too, you can't separate Christian humility from believing in Christ and God.
It almost seems like she's saying, if to keep all the progress that's been made with philosophy, I have to believe in that credo, then I guess I'm going to bite the bullet and do it. But that's kind of but it's unclear, right? It's cryptic. But I think that would be given everything that she said already, that seems to be the conclusion. But I don't know how we get there. I mean, she was raised Jewish. I don't know what this means. Unless I'm totally reading it wrong. Jordan, what do you think?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm kind of combing through this and just, I don't know. I mean, there's like two key words that I'm kind of honing in on this passage. Right. Is the specific credo or credo. Mm-hmm. And like that's a Latin word, and it means like credo. It's like I place trust in. So I don't know. It seems like that she's kind of, and then the shall. That's like first person, and that's like.
And fullest sympathy too is an interesting expression.
Yeah. So shall, and like the thing is too is like shall, that denotes like the future, right? She's not saying I am.
Oh, she may in the future.
So
that's
she's
true
saying,
too.
Yeah, I must admit I shall be.
So I must admit I shall be in fullest sympathy with the zeitgeist that would bring the intellectuals to a point of no longer considering.
So it almost sounds as if she's putting a little just like,
so she's, it
hey,
seems like
future
she's
intellectuals,
yeah. It's almost as if she's saying, all right, I put some sort of trust in this entire body of philosophical thought and progression, but the I shall, that's what I keep, I don't know why, but that's what I keep getting hung up on. So I think she's saying maybe she's not exactly there yet, and she's kind of putting a little trust in this whole 1,000 years, and maybe she's still working through it with the I shall, I'm gonna get to that point. Yeah, she might not be there right now.
So do you think, because it sounds like the I shall be in fullest sympathy with the zeitgeist, that would bring the intellectuals to the point of no longer considering the tremendous body of past philosophy as errors of the past. Do you think that means that she's just talking not about herself but about the future intellectuals or the zeitgeist? Because it almost sounds...
Yeah.
Because that would almost imply that she's
saying a zeitgeist, not the current zeitgeist, right? So...
Yeah, a zeitgeist.
I think she's talking about the current zeitgeist, but the thing is about the zeitgeist is there more than one zeitgeist. I mean, the zeitgeist is something that like zigs and zags. It's a continuous, it's this serpentine thing.
Right, sort of an ebb and flow.
Look. It's a bit of a mystery. I don't know if we're going to figure it out here. Exactly what she's saying. I think Jordan's right to point to some of the interesting language in it.
Yeah.
I think it's cryptic, and maybe it should be cryptic. Maybe
it's that ambiguity that she presents throughout this entire thing, and I think that's the ambiguity. That's why we like to lean towards facts, right? Because we don't like that ambiguity.
Well, what if she came out and said, "And therefore, I'm going to go get baptized tomorrow"? Like, what if she had done that, right? Like, it would go against some of the things that she said earlier in the text about, this would in some way do, if she becomes this authority figure that takes away that people are looking up to, like, this is some of the mystery that you have to work out for yourself. Right? Because then you have the issues of it taking away your freedom. And if you don't have your freedom, you can't work towards merited salvation. So she's not going to come out and say it. Each person's got to go do their homework.
Yeah, but I think she's giving us the stakes here, right? Which I think are...
Yeah, that's interesting. She's going to say, she's like, if it is something, she's going to say that, the stakes are high, right? That if you are going to reject the Christian culture, you've got to throw it all out. You've got to throw out all that philosophy that has that intellectual imprint on it.
Right.
Which is like everything.
And there's a lot of beautiful philosophy, whether you believe in its foundation or not, that has Christian markings all over it. I believe that. I mean, but I'll, it's very hard to get to that foundation through it alone, too. I mean, I'll not to say you need to go to the source.
Yeah, but I mean, it goes back to what you were saying, right? Where, like Kierkegaard, it seems that Arendt is trying to just tell us that the stakes are high and, to wake up that this isn't just pitter-patter cultural fluff. We're dealing with the
it's a significant
powerful
moment.
question of truth.
Yeah.
Religion isn't child's play. God's existence is bigger than any novel anyone could write.
Right.
And no novel anyone could write could even undermine the non-existence of a God or existence. Yeah.
Well, look, I think we did a good job. We're at an hour mark. I think we did a good job. I think we did a pretty good job. Nice job, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for impersonating Hannah Arendt.
Thank you.
I think you might need to.
Hope I made you proud, Hannah.
Yeah, you might have to work on your German accent, but it was very clear. Very good. Very good.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. All right, download the Noetic app. I don't know what we'll do next. We'll talk about it and we'll get back to you. See you. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.